Hi everyone. So now with the body mostly built, I put some attention into the cab. The first order of business was to add some personal effects. So I made a cooler bag using a blend of green stuff and milliput, first making the basic shape, and then once it cured, I added a lid. To make a backpack, I took a 1/35 scale Soviet rucksack, glued it into place, and then added a flap that I made from putty. Lots of guys will also keep a box with stuff that they need on the floor of the truck. So I made a box out of styrene and put some odds and ends into it. To make a paper towel roll, I used a small piece of plastic tube and formed some putty around it. Then I glued the box to the floor and placed the bags on the seat. I also needed to make some modifications to the dashboard. First, I drilled a couple holes to make air vents. Lots of drivers will remove the air vent covers on a truck so they can use them to either warm a pair of gloves in the winter or cool a water bottle in the summer. I also needed to make a much more important modification: cup holders. I started with an angle piece, to which I added an extension before gluing it to the underside of the center console. Then I glued two pieces of plastic tube into place and then filled it in with milliput. Then, after adding straps to the bags and some buttons to the center console, I was ready to start painting. I started by painting everything gray, and then painted one of the bags on the bench a grayish blue, and it only got more exciting from there. After that, I painted the box on the floor and all the stuff inside it. And I painted the instrument panel. To get all the numbers on the dials, I used a marker. And finally, I painted the parking brake yellow, for safety reasons. Now it was time to make the slump tank. This is where all the nasty juices that are squeezed out of the organic waste are collected. I started with a piece of plastic taken from the base kit that had the right shape to it, and then with a marker, I measured out the other pieces. Then I cut some plastic to size and began assembly. The evergreen right angle pieces were absolutely essential to this process, and I've been using them as tabs throughout this build. After assembling the tank, I drilled a small hole and inserted a piece of plastic to make the drain spout. Then, I cut a rectangular piece of styrene and filed down the corners to make a door. It's good practice to stand out of the way when you open this door, unless of course you like the idea of taking a bath in raw sewage. After that, I stuck a couple of circular things to the tank and then attached it to the body. Now it was time to move to the back of the truck and start building the tailgates. I started by cutting out the shape for the sides. Since this is a split stream truck, I made 4 pieces, 2 for each side. After scraping off the edges on some styrene strips, I cut and attached some rib pieces to make a framework that adds strength and rigidity. I also made a small plate that fits over the top corner. With all the pieces in place, I used a right angle bracket to attach a rear panel. To make the bottom, I started by cutting a series of indentations into a thin sheet of styrene to allow me to add some small brackets. Then I glued those brackets into place. After that, I attached a right angle piece across one end of the sheet. I then began gluing the sheet in stages to one of the side panels to get a curve. In the end, I used clamps to keep everything in position. And after that, I attached a front plate. I wound up having to reapply that piece a few times to get a better fit. I also realized at around this point that I'd left a gap that I needed to fill, so I added another piece of plastic inside. While not ideal, the plan here is to fill the hopper with organic waste, so I wasn't very concerned about leaving any messy joints visible. Then I glued a right angle piece down the center of the body. Now I was ready to make the moving parts. I started by using my compass cutter to make a couple of plastic circles, and then sliced them in half and attached a couple of right angle pieces. Next, I glued angle pieces on the ends of the rectangular piece of plastic, and then put the half circles into place. After that, I formed a piece of plastic shading over them. Then came what we're going to call the carrier. This is the part of the packing mechanism that goes up and down. I first fit some plastic strips to the sides, top, and bottom of a rectangular piece, and then got to work on the fittings. First, I took 2 pieces of plastic tube and glued them together at a right angle. Then I wrapped some thin styrene around it and filled the empty spaces with milliput. Then I used this fitting to join some pipes together and make a hydraulic cylinder, and then attached it to the carrier. After that, I connected the carrier to the blade without gluing the pipe to allow me to position it when I was ready to install, and then added the pipe that feeds the hydraulic fluid into the cylinder. After that, I installed the packing assembly. Then I added a supporting arm and the cylinder that opens and closes the blade. It was now time to add the other side of the hopper. I guess now is a good time to explain how this mechanism works. Now, if we pretend that this horse's head was a garbage bag and throw it into the hopper, we then open the blade and lower it. After that, the blade curls shut and is raised, thus packing the horse's head into the body of the truck with the rest of the garbage. With everything installed, I glued a thin sheet of styrene to the bottom of the tailgate, forming it around the lower surface. I then moved my attention inside the hopper and smeared some texture paste around to simulate dirt and grit. I then began painting inside the hopper because it would be difficult to access once everything was fully assembled. Now it was time to attach the right side tailgate to the body of the truck. Then I fabricated a piece that goes at the top of that joint and attached it at the point where the body and the tailgate meet. After that, I began to construct the hydraulic cylinder that raises the tailgate when it's time to dump, carving some components by hand. Once complete, I mounted it onto the truck. At this point, I began to construct the locking mechanism that keeps the tailgate firmly shut while in operation. I started by marking and cutting the appropriate shapes from styrene, and then glued them into position. The hook that latches onto the body was only partially built on the right side, since most of it is not visible, but for the left side, I sketched and fabricated the whole thing. Then I began making the safety stop. This mechanism is meant to prevent the tailgate from closing accidentally in the event that someone needs to go under the tailgate while it is raised. Then I got to work on the rear fender and added these lines. I'm not sure exactly what purpose they serve, but there they are. Then I added this piece that goes over the back and an area that bulges out where the tail lights are placed. And with all that stuff out of the way, I was ready to move on to the controls. I started with the safety buttons. These buttons must be held down to enable the blade to curl, the theory being that this guarantees the operator's limbs will be kept a safe distance from any moving parts. It will slow you down, but if you have a bungee cord and enough common sense not to put your hands anywhere you wouldn't put your dick, then you can bypass them. After that, I began working on the mounting bracket for the handles. In reality, this is made from a single piece of steel, but to get the proper shape, I had to join 2 of them using a corner piece. Then I took a styrene tube and drilled a pair of holes in it, after which I cut it to length. I use a pipe cutter for this purpose because it gives me nice clean cuts without bending or distorting the tube. After that, I cut a pair of teardrop-shaped brackets and then fit the handles and the brackets onto the tube. Then I used milliput to add some knobs at the end of each handle. As you can see, the handles are not perfectly aligned on one set of handles because of how I drilled the holes. At first I was disappointed when I spotted this mistake, until I remembered that because of the increase in pressure as the truck is loaded, often the inside handle will stick in this position on the garbage side as the truck fills up. So I decided to consider this a happy little accident. Now, in case you're wondering, the rear set of levers controls the left side, and the forward pair controls the right. You pull them back to open and bring the blade down, and you push them forward to pack it in and bring the blade up. The levers are connected to the hydraulic system by a set of control rods, for which I used some styrene rods. Then I built a protective cover for them, which sits over the connection point at the top of the tailgate. Then I turned my attention upwards and started working on the roof. Starting with a number of angle brackets, I added the first section of roof. Next, I made the part in the middle that both tailgate sides hinge on when they're raised. Now, one of the wonderful things about evergreen plastic is that they have pieces in such a variety of shapes and thicknesses that it becomes very easy to build the shapes that you want with them. After that, I made this little hump. I'm not sure exactly what it's for, but since it's there, I had to make it. After putting it in place, I began to add the hydraulic lines that feed from the body through the top of the tailgate. For this purpose, I used insulated electrical wire in addition to styrene rods for the lines. And then I added the part the tailgate hinges on when it's raised. With all that finished, I attached the final roof panel and closed it up. Now I'm going to have to admit to a slight error, since I have to go back and add a panel where the taillights would go. On the real thing, they'd be located on the curved section of the roof, but what I'm going to do instead is build an assembly to attach there. One thing I will add is that I recently got myself a punch and die set, and it turned out to be an incredibly useful purchase. Anyone who plans to do any scratch building should definitely consider investing in one. Then I attached this assembly to the roof. I found it slightly easier to build the right side of the tailgate. For one thing, it was bigger, which helped simplify construction, and since the process was similar on both sides, I'd had a bit of practice, and building it was less of a challenge. There were a few differences. For one thing, I managed to build it with no visible tabs inside the hopper. The packing mechanism was the same, only there were 2 hydraulic cylinders on each side in this case. Before installing the packer, I made a few balls using air-dry polymer clay and placed them inside, and once everything was put together, it looked like there were garbage bags being squeezed out from underneath the blade. There's still more work to be done, but for now, I'm going to take a break and touch some grass. And by that, I mean I'm going to make a dead tree. I started by taking the straw that came with a milkshake and cutting it down to length. Then, I stuffed a piece of balsa into one end and jammed a wire into a hole I made in the other end and fed that down to the trunk. And then, after painting a layer of texture paste onto the trunk, I stuffed some splinters of balsa into the top and scored gouges into it. Then I wrapped several strands of thin copper wire around the steel wire branch and brushed on some texture paste. It took several layers to get the contours that I wanted and to cover up the wires on the branch. After that, it was time to start painting the trunk. I started with brown and then moved into gray. This wasn't based on any particular species of tree. My main priority here was that I wanted something tall that I could hang river grape vines on. Now to make the vines, I spread some texture paste over a length of insulated electrical wire. I prefer aluminum over copper because it's better not to waste the good stuff. Then, after painting it brown, I draped it over the tree. To make leaves, I decided to use paper money. This might sound expensive, but if you know the value of an Iranian rial, it's actually pretty affordable. And after spray painting it, I used the maple leaf punches from Green Stuff World because the shape is pretty similar to a grape leaf. Since I planned for the tree to feature one live branch, I differentiated the leaves on it by using a different shape. Then, I began attaching leaves to both the tree and the vine. River grapes are a variety native to North America that can be seen by roadsides across southern Ontario. One neat thing about them is that this variety is important to modern wine production, since the rootstock of river grapes are often grafted onto wine-growing varieties because of its disease-resistant properties. Then, after a quick oil wash, I planted the tree. Now it was time to get into the weeds, starting with the Queen Anne's lace. To make these, I started by winding some thin copper wire around another wire and placed a ball of putty at the end of each strand. Queen Anne's lace is an invasive species that was brought over by European colonists who grew them for their medicinal properties. Once they fell out of fashion, they continued growing by roadsides throughout North America, and you can see them just about everywhere. My next plant was going to be the Canada goldenrod. As the name suggests, they grow everywhere around here, and they even flourish as an invasive species in parts of East Asia. To make these plants, I started by using a leaf punch on the foil from a champagne bottle. Then, after supergluing the leaves to a wire, I bent them into shape. Then I superglued some lichen on top of the wire to make the flowers. And then after that, I painted the green parts green and the yellow parts yellow. And then I started planting. First I jammed a few Queen Anne's lace into the ground, and then moved on to the goldenrod. It was here that I realized that using copper wire was a mistake for the stems, because it bent too easily, and that's why I'm going to use steel in the future. Then I filled out the space with some broom bristles. And that's where I'm going to leave things for now. In the next episode, I'll be making some finishing touches on this build, and I might even start some painting. We'll see how that goes. And I'll be making some more local shrubberies. So until next time, I hope you all enjoyed this, and I'll be back later with some more stuff.